Welcome everyone to Monday Match Analysis. I'm Gill Gross. Today's episode is a conversation with Abigail Johnson as we run through the men's quarterfinal slate at the Australian Open 2023. Abigail joins us from Melbourne, where she's working for AO Radio and Australian Open TV. She is an extremely talented commentator, pundit, very sharp tennis mind, and I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. And by the way, that is a very, very busy gig when you're working for a slam, so I really appreciate her squeezing it in. Without further ado, here's Abigail Johnson. We're joined for the first time by Abigail Johnson. Her commentary has been heard on BT Sport, BBC, ATP TV, or Tennis TV, I should say, and currently AO Radio, Australian Open TV. Joining us from Melbourne. Abigail, thanks so much.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me. It's been a long time of knowing of you, but not guesting yet. So I'm pleased to be here.
Yeah, very glad we could do it. We miss you in the YouTube parts. I know that some other stuff has taken
Thanks.
priority, but we miss you a lot here on YouTube.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that. I still feel bad when I get messages from people telling me that. And look, I never consciously retired it. It was just other things picked up and took me away from where I was filming and all of that kind of thing. So yeah, I'm yeah. Hopefully people can still listen to me elsewhere. I try and make it known when I'm doing what, so that people can tune in if they're missing that a little bit. So no, thanks for that. I appreciate it.
Yes. The plan today is to run through these men's quarterfinals matches, but I was really glad to see that yesterday you were on Rune versus Rublev for AO Radio, and I was glad to see that because this is a match that made little sense, and I need some help dissecting this. So let's start here. What's your take on the quality of that match?
Oh, yeah, it's an interesting one. Because in terms of a contest, it was epic. I was shocked, weak, buzzing, everything when I came off calling that match. It's by far the standout of anything that I've covered. In terms of quality, though, I think the both players will look back at it as a match that they could have brought a more consistent level to. That said, I felt like there was a very clear pattern throughout the match, especially throughout the middle portion of Rublev deliberately hunting loose forehand errors from Rune and kind of pressing that side and knowing that they would come because Rune would get too ambitious or he just wouldn't be patient enough or wouldn't be consistent enough. And at the same time, Rune was getting a lot of cheap points off the Rublev backhand side, going into that quite quickly early in the rallies and just knowing when to approach to that side. And it was certainly a battle for me of what would break down first out of the Rune forehand and the Rublev backhand. So that was the pattern that I noticed majority of the time throughout the clash, which meant that as that was what they were looking for, as much as you had some incredible winners, there were a lot of points that were finishing in, I guess, erratic fashion. I felt that Rublev was missing so many second serve returns as he looked for depth of shot, and sometimes as he just kind of struggled to read on the return. So I felt like that set him back for a portion of the match, even right towards the back end of the match. I felt like that was still giving Rublev issues and still hurting his mental state as well. You could tell that he was feeling it inside. So yeah, I would say, look, not the highest quality match just because of the strategic focus of both players, but at the same time, I went and sat court. I started the match on AO Radio and I finished it off. And for the middle portion, I went and sat courtside to get a feel for it. And some of those winners, some of those Rune winners down the line were just insanity. Like he's an incredible athlete. There's no denying it.
And that kind of brings me to a little exercise I feel will be informative on this match. So just bear with me here. I'll take it somewhere. Who was hitting the ball harder?
Oh my goodness.
I started
Consistent.
off
Well,
with a tough one.
this is
Just
tough
power.
because just power. I feel like the consistent rally pace, the two of them were deliberately taking some pace off the ball at times, and then each of them had something extra in store. For example, Rune's forehand winners down the line. Rublev would occasionally come in and step into the court and fire one a bit extra. So that's a really tough question, in terms of consistently harder. In terms of consistently harder, I feel like Rublev initiated some of the pace, but Rune was more than able to go with it because of his timing. That was the feeling that I had. But yeah, again, I don't think it was a consistent pace from either of them in terms of that power that came into play at times. That's just the way I
Right.
observed it from where I
Yeah.
was.
Before the tournament, when I picked this match, I got it right. I went with Rublev, and it was like, it's not about necessarily the skills or the matchup from a tactical standpoint. It's just Rublev's been to six major quarterfinals. You know you're going to get some level of consistency out of him. You know exactly who he is. Rune is a 19-year-old, top 15 seed at a slam for the very first time, and hadn't won a match in 2023, and just on the mental side of things, just bringing your best. That's where I'm like, I'm just going to go with Andrey, even though I feel like Rune probably has more ways of winning. Isn't that kind of how it played out?
100%. Look, this is where you beat me on this one because obviously I'm at the event. I'm across a lot of different things. So when it came to a prediction for this one, I went with Rune. And I feel like if I went back, I'd probably do the same thing. But my thought process was, and I think I said this on the mic, there are just more depth of options for Rune in terms of how he's going to last over 5 sets. And look, I don't regret it necessarily because I wasn't too far wrong. He served for it. He was
Yeah.
up in the final set tiebreak. He had match points. But 100%. And I was kicking myself for this because I'm so big on the mentality. I go on and on and on about it until I give myself a headache. But I've not really factored in that Rune can get jumpy on court. He can mislead himself anyway. And then when you factor in the stage, for me, that was the only reason he didn't serve out the match. He'd had very little trouble on serve at the back end of that match. The one thing he did supremely, I thought, throughout was being able to finish off immediately with the forehand behind the serve when a little bit of the return power and precision came off from Rublev. If he got inside the court for that, he was putting it away. There were very, very few slip ups there from Rune. And I think the only reason he got broken and broken as quickly as he did was because hey, big occasion, it's different. It's completely different. You can't prepare for that, even as someone as talented as Rune, as capable as him. That's a very different mental situation. And I think, and this is my take on it. I think experience won it for Rublev, not necessarily the experience of having won at this stage before, but the experience of having lost matches like that. So when he was in losing positions, when he was returning to stay in the match, when he was down 5-0 and then 7-3 in the tiebreak, it was a case of, okay, so I've been crushed like this before. What's the worst that can happen? It'll happen again, but I've been there before. And don't get me wrong, when he won, I think you could see exactly how much it meant to him and how much he needed it. But in those moments where he was on the brink, he served impeccably and he got loose, not in a bad sense of the word loose, but he just there was this kind of relief and release of tension whereby he was able to produce at his best level again, whereas at times in the match he was getting frustrated and he was getting tighter and he didn't have that swing through the ball either on the serve or on the ground strokes. And I think yeah, I think that experience of losing those kinds of matches, as much as his experience of winning at that stage of a major, actually came to his aid there because he was able to relax where maybe Rune couldn't when he was up on the scoreboard.
Sure. Yeah, it's well said. And to that point, it's almost a Rublev composure win where, and it's not a word you really associate with Rublev. Composure is not
No.
not the one. But I think that's why after the match he was almost so proud of himself, is because he's like, that never happens. Because when he started going downhill and he was in those holes, I thought he stayed with it pretty well. And Rune's arm just tightened up. He wasn't the same aggressive player from up 5-love in that 10-point tiebreak than he was for the rest of the match. And Rublev did well to take advantage of that, come up with his shots, with Rune just playing a more passive style. Because that's another thing. I felt like Rune could make a lot of mistakes with his decision making, whether it be going after shots that were too ambitious or getting a little pushy. And it's almost like it was predetermined before the point which way he was going to play. He's so athletic that he can play passively and still win with his court coverage. He's so talented that he can play recklessly and still make the shot. So that was kind of my takeaway, that my biggest takeaway, yes, it could have gone either way, but that Rune, if he just dialed in some of the decision making, he would have been the better player and he would have kind of created some separation. But that was the aspect that was missing, and it kind of reminded me of Alcaraz's loss to Berrettini last year in the third round of the Australian Open. So I want to end on this. Rune, I came into the tournament and I was thinking, he's the most confusing player to me. I'm not sure what we're getting here because we have that incredible run indoor hard court, and sometimes that can be misleading, and the sample size is tiny. How do you feel about Rune, how good he is right now after this Australian Open?
Yeah, it's an interesting one actually, because you've got to take so many different components and different factors into consideration. As a talent, as an athlete, as a tennis player, all the tools are there. It is now just a case of managing those tools, obviously sharpening and improving. But it's like you say, when do you play what and how do you play a certain shot? And so often when he was hooked off the court, he was going for a winner in a kind of a ridiculous position that we could see from the outside, but maybe he couldn't see in the moment. There was one particular point that I remember highlighting a few times on my notes where it was 30 all on the Rune serve. And he did the right thing. He built to the Rublev backhand. He came up the court, but instead of just waiting for the ball and putting that volley away, he had to jump up and try and slam it down in the air. And he slammed that into the net. And it's just points like that where it's not even like a technical thing that he needs to work on. It's just a current lack of maturity that you would expect from a 19-year-old. I mean, it's kind of
Totally.
crazy to me that he's still that young. I did a double take when I checked his age again the other day. I was like, whoa, you've been around for a while. You know, he was junior number one. He came through pretty quickly. So I think, yeah, that's always a tough question to answer because as a tennis player, I think he can, as his ranking suggests, easily live with the best in the world right now. He was my dark horse. He was the player I thought had the best chance of troubling Djokovic prior to the final. But yeah, I think the work now is on the mental aspect and just his tactical assessment of matches and when to produce what. Because yeah, that's definitely the next step forward for him, I think.
Yeah, so much room for growth there, and he hopes that the Alcaraz thread will continue. If this was his Berrettini loss, then he's in for a big sunshine double. Let's
There you
get to
go.
these quarterfinals, and we'll start in the bottom half just for fluidity, since we just talked about Rublev. Monday Match Analysis coverage of the Australian Open is brought to you by BetUS. For this year's AO, play with America's favorite sportsbook and get $125 extra on your first deposit using the link in the description and the promo code GIL. Rublev versus Djokovic. Andrey, I dropped earlier that he's been to 6 major quarterfinals. Trouble is he hasn't won a single one. He's 0-6. The Djokovic head-to-head is 2-1, 2 lopsided meetings at the ATP finals. And then Rublev got him in Belgrade when Novak wasn't in great physical condition, and he gassed out in that one. But I think everybody kind of knows that Andrey usually doesn't really have enough in this spot. What do you think is the area where he's most lacking in this kind of matchup?
The return, based on what I just saw against Holger Rune, he's giving too many cheap points there. And my thoughts at the time, because I'm sorry, I already knew that Djokovic was going to be Alex de Minaur. I think we all knew that. Maybe even de Minaur knew that a little bit. But watching that, I was thinking, so what can Rublev actually do if he comes through this to trouble Djokovic? Because he cannot out rally him, and we were seeing him taking what I don't think he can. I mean, obviously he's beaten him on a clay court, whatever form Djokovic was in, so that's something for him. But he was kind of taking the pace off against Rune, and I was thinking, well, Rune's still winning a lot of these rallies, you know. So I don't think he could out rally him from the back. I don't think that he could out return Djokovic. He's one of the game's greats when it comes to the return. And he just with the second serve returns that he was missing against Rune, some of them because of the placement and the kick from Rune, but others because he just wasn't there for that moment. That's a big setback, really in this matchup. And I've almost forgotten your initial question, Gil, because I go on random little tangents here, and there's a lot happening at the moment. But I think really when I'm measuring up these two, the only thing that I think Rublev could maybe do is outserve Djokovic. If he can go back into that loose feeling of freedom, then there is that potential to kind of stay with him and build confidence off the back of that. Uh, but it's a ridiculous task, isn't it? I mean, Novak Djokovic, the nine-time champion in an Australian Open quarterfinal, as complete as he is, and it is scary to me watching Djokovic at times because there were moments where you used to think you could see an opening, that overhead smash, for example. He's tidied that up too. So a lot of it is depending on the level that Djokovic brings to the court, as poor Alex de Minaur found out last night.
Yeah, the hamstring was good, and that's a big deal. My read on the hamstring is that he has just accepted, okay, I need to take painkillers, anti-inflammatories, which is something he will be the first to admit he just does not want to do. Does not want to take anti-inflammatories, and it seems to me, because I know he was taking them mid-match in the first couple rounds. Now I just think he's getting ahead of it, and that's why it looked so much better. It's my read on the situation. It's a little bit speculative, but at the same time, I'm going off stuff that he has said. By the way, I agree with you on Rublev. Return and defense. So I would guess like Djokovic's first serve win percentage, I think 80% or above in this match, if I were to guess.
Yeah, I've been looking at service win percentages actually for a lot of the finalists and quarter finalists. Where are we right now? But no, Djokovic is consistently high, and I think because he doesn't necessarily have the biggest serve, I've always felt like that is the most overlooked factor of Djokovic's game because he's so complete. People are talking about the backhand and the movement, and the serve kind of gets lost amongst it. He is so good at finding his spots when it really matters and keeping the opponent guessing as well. He's clutch with that serve, and I think that Rublev's really going to struggle in that department in terms of that return. Could well be the biggest differentiating factor of the clash.
Yeah. Shelton versus Paul, the other one on the bottom half. This is Ben Shelton's first trip outside the U.S. Could you imagine? I mean, I'm thinking about that, right? Like if you tell your friends or you're 50 years old at the bar and you're like, so where have you been? Oh, I didn't travel much until I was 21. I went to Australia. I made the quarterfinals. It's absolutely ridiculous. Tommy Paul has kind of been building up to this. He had a good year last year. And my first instinct was just Tommy Paul. Like he's done a lot more on this tour. That's the pick. And then I don't know. The more I thought about it, the more I'm like, psychologically, Shelton has zero pressure. I don't see this guy being like, oh, I'm so nervous. I've never been here before. I mean, I just don't see that. And his game is quite captivating. So I'll tell you what my deciding factor is in a moment, but that's why I'm actually giving Ben Shelton a good chance here.
Yeah, he was my instinctive pick coming into this, and then I stopped myself and thought, but hang on, you just did whatever you just did with Rune and Rublev, and Tommy Paul is the man with the more experience here, so you've got to factor that in. But at the same time, like you say, Shelton, this is all kind of new territory for him, so there's that, and with him, the college background and everything, there is, I think, that adds the sensation of little to lose, a lot to gain. It does probably shift here because the draw is so open and it's for a Grand Slam semi-final. This was an elusive stage for so many for so long because of the dominance of the big three, because of the dominance of those guys at the top. That a semi-final at a Grand Slam was just a no access zone for most players. So it's a huge, huge opening. But I just think that I was courtside what feels like yesterday watching part of Ben Shelton's first round match against it was Zhang Zhizhen, I think it was in the first round. I was really curious about that one because two guys that have recently been on the ATP Challenger circuit, and that was where Shelton was most troubled. He went down the wire to the final set tiebreak in the fifth, and he was really feeding off the energy of his team. I wonder how much he'll be able to do that in a bigger arena, but then he'll also have the energy of everyone else to feed off. And I think coming from the college background with that environment, naturally, that is something that you can kind of thrive off and build on. And with his game, that's such a huge game anyway. I don't know when you wanted to get to the technical aspects of this, but I did look at a couple of numbers on this one just to work out what might decide it. Ben Shelton's second serve win percentage is kind of insane. Like he's kept that well above the 70% mark in all of his matches I think that's right anyway. But
Wow.
what's the lowest percentage in terms of okay, so his lowest win percentage on the second serve is 69%, which is that's massive numbers for the second serve. And I think that because obviously a lot of these guys now, you cannot get to the top of the game if you do not have a decent first serve, if you not do not have a pretty big first serve. So we can nail that down. Like all of these guys are serving well, but how's your second serve? That's what is really making a lot of difference. And I think that's a huge reason why Ben Shelton, even though he went down the wire against JJ Wolf, did not have his serve broken in that match, if I am correct. He was not touched in that department despite
Yep.
losing a couple of tie breaks. And yeah, that I mean he's a lefty, of course. Anyway, he's got all these great aspects to his game, and the second serve is a huge weapon right now. It's really helping him in those break point tough situations in the score on the scoreboard, and that's going to make returning life very difficult for Tommy Paul. And I think Paul himself, that was more of an opening in his last match against who did he beat? Roberto Bautista Agut. His second serve was kind of penalized a little bit more, but because of his staying power at the back of the court, he was able to extend those rallies beyond the point where the serve and return were factoring as much. Now, I think I'm not sure how much RBA had left in the tank after that Murray match. That took a lot of mental and physical energy. So I'm not taking anything away from Paul, who I think is much improved in all aspects of his game over the last couple of years. Has added a little bit as well, more confident up at the front of the court, solid backhands. But I just think the Shelton's key weapons are bigger, and that second serve jumps out at me. I think that could win this match for him.
Yeah, those are incredible stats, and they weren't on my radar, so thanks for that.
No worries.
You know, I just go head over heart here, and I look at Paul's path. He beat Struff, he beat Davidovich Fekina, he beat Brooksby and RBA. I mean, it's really really impressive, especially the weapons and with well, Brooksby, RBA, you have consistency. ADF, you have athleticism and power. Struff, you have huge weapons. Shelton's kind of played a similar kind of player a bunch, but, you know, Zhang, as you mentioned, Nicholas Jarry, Alexei Popyrin, and JJ Wolf. But Paul has had a tougher path. So as all of these things are like gut Ben Shelton, I'll go head Tommy Paul. Let's go up to the top half now. And we have another experience versus inexperience. Which way are we going to go on this one? Khachanov against Korda. And I actually think the experience does become a pretty big deal in this one. It's easy to get kind of sucked into the prettier game. I think that Korda possesses, and he's going to be someone that people are going to kind of ooh la la over whenever he's playing, you know, his best tennis, because it is absolutely gorgeous. And I don't know if you ever look at the odds, but Korda's the favorite here. I don't think he should be. Khachanov was. Go ahead.
No. Carry on. I want to hear what else you have to say, and then I'll chip in.
Yeah, I mean, Khachanov was just in the U.S. Open semifinal. We've seen Korda have a lot of issues holding on to leads, and yeah, to his credit, he's been very, very good at responding to those blown leads. And you know he's pulled through, but first set Medvedev, third set Medvedev, super tiebreak Hurkacz. Like he's getting tight, a lot of donations there, and I don't think he gets away with it against Khachanov, who I just have zero concerns with mentally and physically. And that's another thing. I mean, Khachanov is so fit. Korda, I think he's in the best shape of his life here in 2023, but he's had some issues there. And I think this is a match where at the end of it, we look at the unforced error count and Khachanov has a big advantage.
Yeah, I'm glad I let you finish there because you essentially said what I was going to say. I think Sebi Korda, in terms of the range of what he has to offer as a player, is incredible. And there were moments against Medvedev, particularly, that were just breathtaking. The serve, the volley, the touch, the backhand slice, the way he can mix that up and give you different looks at the ball. I also didn't feel that Medvedev mixed it up as much as he could have done in terms of, I remember he managed to turn it around a little bit against Felix Auger-Aliassime. He did start slicing a bit more. He did. I'm talking last year when he was 2 sets to love down in that situation. And yeah, it was a different Daniil Medvedev this year. So that was always going to be a little bit different. But the key thing was Sebastian Korda is a player who traditionally has had trouble closing out big matches. We look as recently as Adelaide against Djokovic. You look back to when he played Rafael Nadal there at the beginning of last year, and there were chances to close, clear chances, and he clearly tightened. I feel like Medvedev's biggest issue in that match, despite the fact he's still heading towards his best, was that he started too slow. He started too slow in each set. He started too slow in each of the tie breaks. And therefore, Korda had time to find his footing. And similarly, against who did he play last? Help me out here. You've literally just mentioned it. Who did he
Yeah,
beat?
it was. Why am I blocking now? Hurkacz.
Okay, so that's it. Poor Hubie Hurkacz. I'm sorry about that, but yeah, again in that final set tiebreak, he went out to an extensive lead. Hurkacz started pulling it back, and yeah, he did well to handle those tight moments at the end, and that was probably big for him. Maybe that gives him a rush of confidence that it got close and he closed it. But again, he had time just to work through that tightness and get across the line. Now, I think again he has more in terms of options to bring to the table than Khachanov, but is he as mentally and physically fit as his opponent for this encounter? And yeah, I think there's a big question mark there in that department, despite what he's done so far. So I've predicted against Karen Khachanov a little bit recently, and not it's not gone well for me. I might have been giving Tiafoe the slight edge in that match when they faced off. So I'm not sure that I would be ambitious enough or confident enough to do so again. Therefore, I'm not sure I'll make an outright prediction on this one, but as much as I'm convinced by Korda and would love to see him go further and capitalize on what we've been seeing purely on the mental aspects and closing out the match, I think I'd start to lean towards Khachanov.
Well, if we're wrong, we're both wrong. So there's
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, my gut on this one was saying Korda, but I just feel like with the Rune Rublev situation, I didn't factor in the mentality enough, and there are signs that Korda could have been more troubled than he has been if that scoreline had been closer. I think Khachanov can keep it closer. He's well
And
rounded.
yeah, and I think we so often see in majors when the draws open up, it gets so mental. I think the most famous example is U.S. Open 2020 when Djokovic gets disqualified, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, what? There's no Nadal, there's no Djokovic," and a lot of the matches were so mental in terms of just nerves being very very crippling. So I think it's something that will always kind of happen. All right, Tsitsipas Lehecka. Yuri has had probably the best run out of anyone on the men's side, beating Nori, beating FAA, beating Chorich. You could make an argument for Korda with Hurkacz and Medvedev, but Lehecka, that's 3 wins that I don't think a lot of people were expecting out of him. I'm not really sure what his weakness is, but at this point, my mentality is I'm not going against Tsitsipas. I mean, I've been so impressed with first of all just his focus that I actually thought was missing a lot last year, or not a lot, but at times. I mean, at the last major, he loses to Daniel Galan, and I haven't felt any of that fragility from Tsitsipas, and he's playing the right way on his backhand. The serve is great. The forehand is enormous. I'm very high on him right now.
Oh my days, I've been so impressed with Tsitsipas. I feel you 100% because other places I have so much Tsitsi doubt. I don't even know if that's a thing, but I've just made it a thing. And like you say, at the US Open, I remember watching that match and I was a little bit shell shocked, like what's happened here. And I've rated Tsitsipas and what he has to bring to the table for a long time. I think that we can kind of overlook the fact because we're so into what's happening across the season. Tsitsipas has had some of his biggest encouragements here. For example, when he beat Roger Federer here previously, and these are conditions that he's always really kind of thrived in. He made the semifinals last year. It only took a red hot Daniil Medvedev to stop him. And the biggest thing that's impressed me about Tsitsipas is the way he plays at breakpoints down, the way he plays when he has something to lose. Boy, does he step up and produce. Backhand, forehand, serve, return, I don't care. Like he's nailing those points that are of the most importance. And that was something that I noted when in his very first round against Quentin Elise, who is a player I've been following for some time, expecting to break through sooner than he has. I wandered across to Margaret Court's arena because it was tight in the third, and I thought, okay, well, traditionally, in more recent times, this is where Tsitsipas could win the match in straights, but he maybe goes to a fourth set. So let's see what happens here. Down set points at the back end of that match, steps up, big forehand winner, just took the game on. I think there was some kind of ridiculous passing shot in there as well. And that was when I thought, okay, this guy's serious, and the way he can lock in and produce in that moment, very, very impressive. I don't think too much about the fact that he lost those third and fourth sets against Sinner, just because he was able to pull it back together again when it really mattered. He knew the moments that he had to be really present in that match, and he produced in them. And credit to Sinner tactically with his position, all of these different things. He adjusted and he made Tsitsipas think a little bit more. He got in his eye line. He made him more uncomfortable, and should be given credit for that. But Tsitsipas should also be given credit for how he was able to ultimately come through at the back end of the match when suddenly the momentum was against him. He'd lost two straight sets, and in terms of his composure, he was able to stay with it. So I think in terms of that big moment brilliance, as much as Lehecka's hitting a big ball and has done really well to manage himself, he has also been pushed in most of his matches. And I think that, yeah, you've got to go with Tsitsipas here. Credit to Lehecka if he has a big upset and can really kind of get on top of Tsitsipas and stay there. But that's a big ask over best of five sets.
Yeah, absolutely. Lehecka dominated Felix in the rallies in their matchup. It's gonna be a lot harder to do that against Tsitsipas. I completely agree with your assessment of the match against Sinner too, where I don't think there's a lot of negatives to take away on Steph's side of things. You have a busy day ahead. You're doing a tremendous job. I've loved getting to listen to you on AO Radio. So I will
Thank you.
I'll let you get to it, and I appreciate taking the time.
Gil, thank you so much. I wish I could have given more time and been less pressed for it. I respect your work and everything you do and your knowledge of the game. You're great to have as a presence in the tennis community. So thank you for everything you do, and thank you for having me.
Thank you.